Hello friends, here we will discuss the factoring and the forfeiting. Okay, so what do you mean by factoring and what do you mean by forfeiting? So friends, see, both factoring and forfeiting are two methods or the tools which are available to whom? To the exporter. For what? For a finance, which allows exporter to sell their book debts and the raise finance. So what do you mean by that? See, basically the factoring and forfeiting are mainly tools which are only for the exporter, which are mainly available for exporter. See what happens. See, suppose he is the exporter and here I is the importer. So exporter is from India and importer is from USA. Okay, so exporter when sends some goods, right, he will export some goods. In that return, importer will send a payment to exporter, say after 6 months. Okay, so this is long duration, but that's why exporter will receive the payment after 6 months as per the agreement. Okay, now exporter want money for further doing the business on urgent basis. So here say a bank SBI or say any factor, say a factor, just remember the factor or a forfeiter, any financial institution you can take. Okay, any financial institution in India. So what he will go to that financial institution and will say, I have to receive a 6 month later money, but I want it urgent basis. So that a financial institution will give him money. Okay, say suppose 100 million is supposed to receive, say then that financial institution to the exporter will give say 80 million. So 20 million they will give after 6 months, but at least some money, that means up to 80% exporter will get early. Okay, so that is the factoring and forfeiting. Okay, so exporter will sell what? Their book debts as well as the receivables. So I repeat, basic difference. What is the basic? See, India is USA. In India there is exporter. In USA there is a importer. We have sent some good to the USA. That is, exporter have some sent some good, and he will receive say 100 million after 6 months. But he cannot wait for the 6 months. So he will reach to the financial institution, and he will say all the story. He will produce the document, and then financial institution will say, okay, you are going to receive 100 million after 6 months. We will give immediately 80 million. Okay, so that is the concept of the forfeiting or the factoring. Now, what is the difference between factoring and forfeiting? That also we will discuss. So basically, first we will discuss the factoring. So what is the factoring? See, factoring, it is a financial option for management of the receivable. As I have already told you, it is the just arrangement for what? For to manage the receivable. See, I have already told you about the factoring. The concept is very simple. Here is a India, here is a USA. From exporter to importer you are sending the goods. You are receiving the money after say 6 months or 18 any long duration. So exporter will can't wait to receive such a money. So he will reach to any bank or financial institution to sell that after 6 months he will receive. So he will give the documentations, complete the documentation, and they will finance him 80% of that. Okay, so it is just arrangement what? For selling the receivables. Next, in simple word, it is a conversion of the credit sales into the cash. Okay, simply you can say it is you are converting the credit sales, means future receivables you are selling to the any financial institution, and you will get a cash. Okay, now see, in factoring, a financial institution factor buys account receivable of a company client and pays up to 80% or up to 90% of the amount immediately or on agreement. Okay, so here exporter, importer, okay, goods sent, money will receive after 6 months. Here is a financial institution which gives money to the exporter because he can't wait for 6 months. So that's why that a financial institution is called as the what? It is called as the factor. Remember that financial institution is called as the factor. Okay, now how much fund can be raised? Up to 90%. In some cases, generally it is 80%, but it can go up to 90% with immediate, it may be immediately or upon the agreement. Now see, what is about the remaining money? Factoring company pay the remaining amount, that is balance 20% or 10%, subtracting what? Subtracting the finance cost, any charges or operating cost. That amount will be paid after deducting that, right? That is from balance 20%, you have given 80% in the upfront, right? The remaining 20% from that you will subtract the operation cost or finance cost, then that they will be delivered to the client. Okay, so what is the factoring? It is simply exporter has exported the goods to the importer, but he will receive a payment of say 100 million after time say 12 months. So out of that, here is a factor will come into the picture. So factor exporter will reach to the factor and they will do some agreement. So according to the agreement, factor immediately will give 80 million to the exporter. So exporter can do the business continue. Okay, he don't wait to for the 12 month, and immediately he will give, and remaining amount is a 20. From that he will subtract the charges or any cost or commission, factor commission, and remaining 20% amount will be given to the exporter upon settlement. Okay, that is means at the end of the period. Okay, so this is all about the factoring. Now what are the different services provided? What are the services provided by factor? Okay, so what that is the financial institution or a factor, they provide which services? First, debt administration, how? Managing the sales ledger of the client and serving his administrative cost by following up and collecting the receivable. So obviously, so India, USA, exporter, importer, goods has been sent, you will receive money, but here in India there is a factor. Okay, who instead of a 6 month you are receiving going to receive 100 million, he will immediately give you the money. That means you, whatever the debt you are having say 100, that will be transferred to the factor. So factor will be doing the debt administration, and also different follow up is required, and also the factor will collect the receivable from the importer. Okay, he will immediately give you, but after 6 months, then upon agreement importer will send to whom? Factor, because factor has financed to the exporter, that is upfront 80%. So importer will send 100 after 6 months to the factor. Okay, simply it is very easy to understand. It is very easy and understandable concept. Okay, debt administration should be is done by the factor. Now what is the next benefit of a factoring? Credit protection. Using a credit intelligence available at their disposal to assess the credit risk, the security advises their clients. So basically, see, factors are very professional. I repeat, importer, exporter, and goods have been sent. Then here is a factor, right? Here is a factor in the exporter to importer. Okay, so here is a factor in the country of exporter generally. So that exporter are very, they are very professional. They are having a data and they are having different tools. Like we are having CIBIL, right? They are having different tool, so they can categorize the exporter. Okay, so whatever the credit administration risk of exporter, that is receiving money after 6 months or 12 months, that will be transferred to the factor. Okay, that is the credit protection. Next, factor financing the client up to 80 to 90% of the receivable. So again, exporter importer, here is a factor. So factor will finance to the exporter up to the 90% or 80% of the receivable. Okay, so that is simply the factor financing. Okay, so what are the benefits of we can say having a factor? Having a factoring is a debt administration, credit protection, and the factor financing. Now see, we have discussed factoring, right? Now there are various factoring systems, so it is very easy. What are the factoring systems? See, first is the single factor. What do you mean by that? When the exporter and importer decide to have a common factor, to speed up the process and reduce the cost. That is the single factor. Means simply, here is the exporter, here is the importer. Exporter will send money, exporter will send goods to the importer. Okay, and importer is supposed to send money after 6 months. But here is the picture of a single factor. Single factor means which is a common in both. Okay, they mutually decide, mutually they will talk and they will decide a single factor. Okay, they both are decided, both will talk and they will decide a single factor. So there is only one institution which work as a factor between the exporter and importer. Okay, so they are not having trust towards each other, so factor will do work as an intermediate. Instead of after 6 months, the factor will give exporter immediate money. On immediate or upon agreement, money will be given by factor to the exporter. Okay, so this is the single factor. Now what is the double factor? Very easy. Where the different factor are used by the exporter and importer. Means simply, here is the exporter and here is the importer. Exporter will say I will have my own factor, and importer will say I will have my own factor. Okay, because they are in different country, they are not trusting each other or a factor of other. So exporter will say I will have my own factor, importer will say I will have my own factor. Okay, so how they will work? They will send goods. So importer factor will contact only the importer factor. In the, say if we are in USA, they will contact only to the importer factor, and the exporter will contact only the exporter's factor. Okay, there will be basically a double factor means two factors, means there are two factors. Next, direct export financing means what? Simply, here only one factor based in the exporter's country is employed who makes all the arrangement, including assigning the credit of the debtor and as well as the collection. See, direct export factoring was, see here it is like a single factor, but here is the exporter, here is the importer. Okay, now here in a direct factoring method, it is only one factor in the exporter's country. So here will be the factor, and that is on main in the exporter's country. Okay, not in the importer. That's why it is called as the direct export factoring, because factor is only in the exporter's country, and that factor will do all the work of the factoring. Even collection of the debts is also done by the, or receivables will be done by the factor, and vice versa. What is a direct import factoring? Only one factor based on the importer's country is engaged for doing the financing of the debts. Means again, here is a exporter, here is a importer, right? And a factor will be in the only where in importer's country. Okay, so here in a direct import financing, one factor is in the importer's country only. Okay, so that is the direct import financing. So I repeat, what is a single factor? Means here is only one factor, it may be exporter or importer's country. Okay, single factor means only one factor is there, it may be in the exporter's or importer's country. Commonly they will decide. In double factor, there are different factor for importers and exporters country. Next, direct exporting, there is only one factor for the exporting country, and for direct import factoring means there is only one factor in the importer's country. Okay, so these are the four factoring systems. Now what are the advantages of factoring? You can commonly say up to 90% you will get advance, upfront payment you will get up to 80 to 90%. That is on agreement or immediate basis. There is no need of LC, right? What we have discussed LC in detail, right? For such cases, export import, when there is a late payment, generally the exporter demand for the letter of credit, right? So here no need of LC. So who open the LC? Importer is generally opening the LC, we all know, right? So there will be cost saving for the importer because there is no need of LC. Next, sales ledger maintenance. So whatever the record you have to maintain, right? You are going to receive say 100 million after 6 months. Up to 6 months you have to maintain the record. But on immediate basis you will get what? You will get upfront payment, or the upon agreement you will get the payment from factor. That is, exporter will get the payment from factor. That's why sales ledger maintenance is work to be transferred to the whom? To the factor. Okay. Next, we have to discuss forfeiting. So before that, credit protection is also one of the advantages for the for the factoring, and advisory services are for a new area than country. See here how credit protection. Exporter will export, importer will receive, and exporter will receive a payment up to 90% from factor. So definitely the credit protection will be to the factor, to the exporter, and advisory services for a new area and a country. So here you can say here is the exporter and here is the importer. So from exporter is from India, right, and here the importer is from say Tanzania, right, and so Indian exporter is not aware about the importer in the Tanzania. So how they can function? So so they will decide the factor. Factor is having knowledge about both importers and exporter, because they are having they will provide the advisory services also. Who? Factor. Okay, so these are the benefit of the factoring. Now what is a forfeiting? See friend, forfeiting is a discounting. Now see here that we will discuss while comparing the factoring and forfeiting. So now first see we have discussed the factoring. Now forfeiting. What is a forfeiting? It is the discounting of international trade receivable on 100% without a recourse basis. What do you mean by without recourse? See, here is a exporter and here is a importer. Again, exporter has sent the goods, and after say 12 months they are going to receive 100 million. So here is the forfeiter. Here is the forfeiter. Forfeiter will say, I will give you exporter up to 100%, means up to 100 out of 100 I will give to the exporter, right? So instead of waiting 12 months, exporter will receive 100%. In factoring, what we have said, it is up to the 80 to 90%, but forfeiting is 100%. And here is a without recourse, means what? There is a no so in instead of waiting 12 months, forfeiter will give 100% to the exporter, and collection of that 100 from importer is now the responsibility of the forfeiter. Okay, so after 12 months he will receive from the importer, and here exporter will receive 100 million on upon agreement with the forfeiter. Then the liability of exporter is ENCR. The whole liability lies only with the at own of a forfeiter. That is the without recourse, means no liability with the exporter. Okay, so without recourse means once the exporter get a payment from the forfeiter, there is no liability of the exporter. That is the without recourse. Now it is a form of a supplier's credit involving sales or the purchase of receivables falling due at some future date. The exporter is responsible for the validity of his order and execution thereof. But once the documentation has been delivered and accepted, the discounting is done, there is absolutely no recourse to the exporter. So the only thing which you have to remember, difference between the factoring and forfeiting is, factoring you can get only 80% in case of factoring, but in case of forfeiting you can get up to the 100% finance. And here the factoring, it may be with or without recourse. That means it is depend on the condition, but a forfeiting is 100% without recourse. Now say what the exporter will prefer. Obviously, if I am the exporter, I will go for the forfeiting. Why? Because I am getting 100% payment, as well as it is a without recourse. That means without a liability of the exporter, right? If in case the importer doesn't pay, there is no liability with the exporter. Okay, that is the without recourse. Now see, forfeiting effectively transforms a credit sale into the cash, like what? Like factoring and forfeiting. But forfeiting is having fixed rate of interest, and it is up to the medium term, that is 3 to 5 year. It can be, however, structured on a floating rate interest basis, as well as for a long period up to 10 years and shorter period drawn up to 90 years. So basically, in a maximum cases, forfeiting is done at a fixed rate of interest. Okay, definitely forfeiter will not give you money they will give money, but with provided they will apply some charges, commissions and interest, and generally the interest in the forfeiting is the fixed rate of interest. Forfeiting is generally suitable for a high value export like a heavy machinery, capital goods, consumer durable, vehicle and a project export. So when we do the forfeiting, when we are involving with the high value export, that time the forfeiting is generally done. Now see here, forfeiting is done against the bill of exchange or a promissory note and duly accepted by the importer and guaranteed by his bank. It is also known as the avail. This is the process of availing. So here we are giving 100% finance, right? Factoring here, see, it is very interesting, export and import, right? Say 100 million deal. After 12 months they are going to receive, exporter will receive that money, okay? But factoring is done against what? Bill of exchange or a promissory note duly accepted by the importer and guaranteed by his bank. So here the forfeiter is there. He will give 100%, that is 100 million is given by that forfeiter to the exporter, and it is without recourse. So once the exporter receives money, he will not liable for any recovery from the importer. So recovery from importer is the responsibility of whom? Now the forfeiter. So forfeiter how can blindly give 100% and without recourse, that is without responsibility of the exporter? So there is a provision for what? There may be a promissory note or there may be a bank guarantee, okay, which should accepted by importer also, so that forfeiter will feel safe, okay. And that is the main difference between factoring and forfeiting. Forfeiter you can get without recourse of the export, that means there is no liability with export, but the forfeiting is always backed by the promissory note or what, or the bank guarantee, okay. Now importer's obligation is normally supported by the local bank guarantee, okay. Now what are the advantages of doing the forfeiting? See, it eliminates what? Country risk and the credit risk, okay. Exporter will get a money, there is no recourse with the exporter, there is no liability with the exporter, and that's why there is no risk for the exporter to receive the money, because risk is transferred to the forfeiter, okay. Next, cost saving on export credit insurance. So you don't need to do the insurance, as you are getting 100% payment upon agreement, right? So there is a cost saving on export credit insurance. Next, make 100% finance available against the invoice, right? In factoring up to 80 or maximum 90% is only allowed, but here in case of forfeiting you will get 100%. It is without recourse. So once the agreement between the exporter and the forfeiter has been done, he will receive the 100% finance, right? There is no, that's why the liability with the exporter is no more liability, and the benefit is there is a fixed rate of financing in case of a forfeiting, okay. So the best way to understand what we have learned through the factoring and forfeiting is we will discuss it by comparing, okay. So see here, what is the factoring? Factoring is arrangement that convert your receivable into ready cash, and you don't need to wait for the payment of receivable in a future date, okay. Now what is a forfeiting? It implies a transaction in which the forfeiter purchases the claim from the exporter in return for the cash payment. So factoring, it is just an arrangement, whereas forfeiting is a proper transaction where the forfeiter will purchase the claim of a exporter, okay. Now next, what is the maturity? It involves account receivable of a short maturity. It is generally the factoring is up to the short maturity period, but forfeiture is involved for the long term maturity period or medium to long term. Next, the trades receivable in factoring is generally the ordinary goods. So if you are doing export of ordinary goods, then you can go for the factoring. But if you are doing a trade on the capital goods, like I have told you, where is a huge money is involved, like project finance, which are capital goods, then you have to go for the forfeiting. Now, here in case of factoring, up to 80 to 90% you will get a finance, but here 100% finance is there because there is huge amount of money is involved and there are capital goods. Now, uh, factoring, it may be recourse or a non-recourse basis. Okay, that means liability lies with the exporter or may not lies with the exporter. It is as per the agreement. But in case of a forfeiting, it is always a non-recourse basis. Okay, what is the cost? The cost in case of factoring borne by the seller, means a client, means whatever the cost is borne, it should be borne by the exporter, right? He will receive a money immediately, so he have to pay some commission to the factoring. And here in case of the forfeiting, the cost of forfeiting is borne by the buyer. Okay, it is by the buyer, because here the forfeiter is purchasing the bill from the exporter, and buyer have to buy the cost of forfeiting. Okay, this is also important difference, you can easily remember. Cost of a factoring is generally bought by the seller, that is the exporter, and cost of forfeiting is borne by the buyer, that is the importer. Now, negotiation. See, the factoring does not deal the negotiable instruments, but here they deal in the negotiable instruments, forfeiting. Okay, so what we have learned, the main difference between factoring and forfeiting, both are you can get a finance right before the maturity, but in case of factoring it is 80 to 90%, but for forfeiting it is up to 100% you can get. It may be with or without recourse of the exporter, it is always without recourse of the exporter. Okay, and it is a cost, the cost of factoring, it should be borne by the exporter, and here forfeiting cost is borne by the importer. Okay, so and forfeiting, it is backed by the bank guarantee or the promissory note. Okay, so there is no provision such a for the factoring. So this is the main difference between forfeiting and factoring. So you can subscribe us on our YouTube Banker Zone. You can join our Telegram group for study purpose, and the group name is CAIB Banker Zone. For that you can search on the Telegram @CAIBBZ. You can download the application from Play Store, Bankers Zone CIB, for full courses. So friends, we'll continue our discussion in the next video.